Dr. Thomas Gangale holds a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering, a master's in international relations, and a doctorate in space, cyber, and telecommunications law. And he's also the author of the Martian Almanac, which presents a 669 sol almanac of the coming Martian year. So, good afternoon, or good morning for you, Dr. Thomas. How are you today?
I'm doing great, thank you.
So without giving too much away about the book, I mean, I don't know if it's the type of book that you could spoil anything about, just take it from there, really, because it sounds very interesting.
Well, the structure of it is rather unique, as you said. It presents the 669 sol year of the Martian year, sol by sol, and goes back in time into history to show specific events that occurred on that particular anniversary on each sol. So it encompasses the publication of science fiction stories and novels, the release of even music that had a Martian theme, as well as important dates in the history of the exploration of planet Mars with various robotic missions to the planet.
Yeah, it's interesting because you say robotic missions. Most of the early human history of Mars has happened on Earth because we've never actually been to Mars yet.
Exactly. So there are only humans on Mars by proxy in the form of various landers and rovers: Viking, Sojourner, Insight, Curiosity, Perseverance, and Zhurong, a Chinese rover.
Do you think that man will directly go to Mars sometime soon?
I believe that'll occur sometime in the 2030s. That's the current schedule. Of course, that's dependent on funding. There have been plans to go to Mars before, and no bucks, no Buck Rogers. If you don't get the funding, you don't get to go.
Is that schedule something that is always getting pushed back? I mean, say 20 years ago, would we have said we've already done it by now?
I think as early as the early 1980s, we could have said we should have done it by now, because NASA had a plan in 1969 to send a crew to Mars in the early 80s.
Wow.
So, the planning for going to Mars is more than half a century old. We always seem to be anywhere from 15 to 30 years away from landing on Mars.
Yeah.
It's kind of like commercial fusion power, where it's always 20 to 50 years away in the future. It's been that way for 50 years.
Well, things have been looking promising recently. This news about the fusion, is that exciting?
Oh, yeah, sure. I mean, progress is being made, and progress has always been made. It's just that the future never gets here as fast as we expect it to. The development time is always underestimated.
Yeah. Now, I think it's maybe worth mentioning for people that maybe don't know, a sol is basically just a word for a day on Mars, isn't it? So right. This covers 669 sols. Would I be correct to assume that that's how long a year is on Mars?
Yeah. And although we have a word for sol, which is specific to Mars, because the rotation of Mars is slightly slower than Earth. So a sol lasts 24 hours and just a shade under 40 minutes. We don't have a specific word for a Martian year. I propose one. I call it a Mars Rev, which would be one revolution of Mars around the sun.
It's a good idea. Why can't we just use the word year and day? Why does it have to be different? Would we just confuse them with the same period of time that we use on Earth?
Well, they are different periods of time, for one thing. And of course, they pertain to two different planets with two different astronomical cycles. So starting in 1976 with the Voyager missions, Jet Propulsion Laboratory and NASA coined the word sol, so they wouldn't be confused between the Martian solar day and the Earth solar day. Now, why no one has ever come up with an agreed upon word for the Martian year, I don't know. I think that's because the mission controllers pretty much work sol by sol and don't plan things out in terms of Martian Martian years.
So what made you want to write this book?
Well, I invented a calendar for Mars in 1985, published an article in the Journal of the British Interplanetary Society in 1986. And I just thought the idea would just stay right there. I didn't really do anything more with the idea for maybe 15 or 20 years. And then as the web started up and we were able to connect better with each other around the world, I found that other people were interested in how one would keep time on Mars once we land there, start exploring it, eventually set up bases there, permanent presence, and perhaps even colonization.
Yeah.
So at this point, about a year or two ago, I thought that perhaps it was time to write an entire book or series of books presenting the timekeeping on Mars to the general public and get them interested in not only what has gone on around Mars and on Mars in terms of spacecraft and rovers, but also what has happened on Earth in terms of the culture of Mars, beginning with early astronomical observations by Christian Huygens, Percival Lowell, Giovanni Schiaparelli, and moving on to and how that influenced the writings of H.G. Wells and Edgar Rice Burroughs and other science fiction authors.
Yeah.
So all of that I present in the book.
And who is the book for specifically? Is it for anybody that is interested in Mars? And what I really mean is, do you have to be somebody as smart as you with your PhDs and masters to actually understand it?
No, you might need to know some basic astronomy, and things are very simply explained. What the rotation period of Mars is, how long it takes Mars to go around the sun. But really, anybody who is interested in history and culture specific to Mars will find this book very accessible, I hope.
Yeah. How far do you go back in terms of that history? Because generally when we think of history, we kind of learn about things from the past 100 years or so into the thousands, whereas Mars, it's a little bit longer than that.
Yes, true. The Babylonians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Egyptians all had their stories about the planet Mars and the deity that they believed the planet manifested in the sky.
Yeah.
And and also India. Let's not forget Asian cultures. So there are annual festivals that were observed in these many cultures. There were stories about the deity itself. And I reference a little bit of that, but don't dwell too much upon that. Mostly the history of Mars begins with the first astronomical observations beginning in 1610 with Galileo.
Is there a specific point where we say the new year has started now? Because on Earth, New Year starts on the 1st of January. We know where we are. Is there a Martian calendar that tells us the new year has started now?
Yes, there is a consensus among astronomers that the astronomical year, both on Earth, as distinct from the civil calendar, and Mars as well, begins with the vernal equinox, the first day of spring. So I use that in my calendar as well. The first day of spring on Mars in the northern hemisphere begins the calendar year. And that occurred December 25th. So on Christmas, it was Christmas on Mars, and it was New Year's Day on Earth. Yeah. I mean, on just the opposite. It was Christmas Day on Earth, but it was New Year's Day on Mars.
Yeah. And does that date change every year because a Martian year is longer, or do we just keep it the same?
No, because the Martian year is longer. The next Martian year won't begin until November of 2024.
Wow, that's a long time to wait.
Yeah, it's approximately 22 and a half months. 669 sols is approximately 687 days, I believe.
That's the thing we've got to think about, isn't it? If we, for whatever reason, were to move to Mars as a human race, we'd have to wait so much longer for Christmas and all the fun stuff, wouldn't we?
Well, I don't know. That's a cultural question that is best left to the future people living on Mars, how they observe anniversaries on Earth. I don't think that you would want to observe Christmas on Earth and Christmas on Mars at different times. I think that would
Yeah.
be done simultaneously because, of course, there will be a lot of communication between Earth and Mars. Yes, there's a time delay because of the distance and the speed of light, but
Yeah.
Martian culture will still be somewhat connected to Earth culture.
Yeah.
So a lot of the things that we bring with us to Mars from Earth, we're going to use on Mars. In some ways, the way we do on Earth, in some ways differently. And so that's a cultural question that is best left to the future Martians.
Yeah. And how long is that delay, by the way, if you're using some kind of radio communication? Because if we were talking to somebody on the sun, for example, ignoring the fact that they'd be burning to death, it would take about 8 minutes for the wave to reach them, so it'd be terrible. On Mars, how long would that delay be?
I can't give you the specific numbers off the top of my head, but when Mars is close to Earth, the time delay is probably on the order of 4 or 5 minutes.
Wow.
But there are times when Mars and that's just one way. When the Mars is on the other side of the sun from the Earth, and assuming that the sun isn't directly between Earth and Mars, which is blocking out radio waves entirely, the time delay could be 20 minutes or so.
That's an important point, actually, because we often think of Mars being maybe our closest neighbour because we look at the planets on a list, as in their distance from the sun. We go Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and so on. But really, surprisingly, Mercury is actually closest to Earth most of the time, right?
Yeah, most of the time. Yeah, I never thought of it that way, but that's correct.
So how long did this book take you to write?
I'd say about 2 years, and I've already started on the next books in the series.
Because I noticed this one is the Martian Almanac 220, Volume 1. So how many volumes do you think you're going to have?
Well, if this series is successful, it will outlive me. Someone else will have to do the later volumes.
That's an interesting idea.
So volume one takes us through the first half of the current Martian year. Volume 2 is already published, and that takes us through the second half of the Martian year. So through about the middle of November 2024 in Earth terms.
Yeah.
And then I'm working on the Martian Almanac for the Mars Rev 221 as we speak.
This is a series that can just go on forever, right? Assuming there won't be some kind of Martian apocalypse.
Right. Or an Earth apocalypse.
Yes.
For in Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles, Martian colonization came to an abrupt end when there was a nuclear war on Earth. So we've got to take care of this planet, either avoid a nuclear war or mitigate climate change or any number of things, so that we can go on and establish a new world on Mars for ourselves.
People always look to Mars as a very good planet to go to if everything went all wrong on Earth, but it's probably not really. I think I'm right in saying it's actually colder than Antarctica. Why would you even want to go there?
It is, loosely speaking, the most habitable planet we know of. And like I say, it's loosely speaking because the temperatures are sub-zero most of the time, either Fahrenheit or Celsius. The atmosphere is only about 1% as dense as on Earth. So even if it was pure oxygen, we wouldn't be able to exist there. Our blood would just boil right out of our blood vessels. But the problem is that the planet's atmosphere contains very little oxygen. It's mostly carbon dioxide. So I've heard it said that the atmosphere of Mars is 99% vacuum and 1% toxic. But we're going to learn to live on the moon. We're going to be sending crews to the moon in the next 2 or 3 years, and we'll establish a permanent base there, and we'll learn to use the resources on the moon to create habitable environments, enclosed habitable environments, and we'll take those lessons learned and apply them to the planet Mars. Mars a decade or two hence.
Yeah. Going to Mars, what kind of provisions does there have to be? If it's just a mission there, does the astronaut have to wear a lot more protective equipment?
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah, you'll have to wear spacesuits on Mars for the foreseeable future. People have been talking about terraforming Mars for decades, turning the Martian climate into a more Earth-like one. And God knows we know how to warm up a planet,
Yes,
but
certainly.
the time scale might be centuries or even thousands of years. We just don't know. We've never done planetary engineering deliberately on that scale. We're doing
Yeah.
it inadvertently on Earth, and of course, it's been taking decades to do what we're doing to Earth, and that's simply the byproduct of a very, very large global economy. Yeah, it's billions and billions of people creating this climate change. On Mars, of course, we're going to be starting out with just a few people, and much less of an economic activity that would be geared towards even specifically creating a more Earth-like environment. It would be very expensive. It would be very long-term, and I'm skeptical about how we would finance such a thing to begin with. It would be very expensive.
Yeah. A lot of people would argue we've already made such a mess of the planet that we're in. Why would we go and make a mess of another planet?
This is whimsical, but in the mid 1960s, in an interview, Wernher von Braun said about establishing a colony on Mars. He said, "I say we do it quickly and establish a foothold on a new world while we still have one to take off from." And even Carl Sagan said, we don't want to keep our eggs all in one basket. If we want to ensure the survival of humanity, we want to establish a foothold on a new planet in case something happens to Earth, and it may not even be our doing. Suppose an asteroid hits that's sufficiently large, like the one that ended the reign of the dinosaurs on Earth. Well, game over, unless we have people on Mars.
But who gets to go to Mars? Would it be a very small elite number of people that are put there in the emergency? Because there's no way you'd get 8 billion people to Mars.
Yeah, the skill set required on Mars will evolve over the decades. You'll start out with a small number of people with very highly skilled, probably cross-trained in several disciplines. Like you'll need physicians. You'll also need medical assistants whose primary job is something else, maybe astronomers or engineers or biologists. So the skill set will be very specific to begin with, and as we have more people on Mars doing increasingly diverse things, we're going to need we're going to need accountants and lawyers.
Yeah.
Things that we think of on Earth as very mundane things. We're going to need farmers. We're going to have to grow our own food supply on Mars if we're going to have a sustainable human presence. And I guess that starts out with the potatoes from the movie The Martian.
Yes, certainly. And would we have to bring some animals up in order to eat meat, or is this in the future? Is nobody going to eat meat anymore? We'll live off the plants.
Well, that's a tough call. There are being strides made in growing meat in a laboratory.
Ooh.
And not having a whole organism like a cow or a pig or whatever, but just growing the muscle tissue that we consume. And it may be that by the time we're ready to actually settle people on Mars, we'll have that technology in hand commercially. It could be that we'll already be decreasing our dependence on whole animals here on Earth.
Well, what else is coming up for you other than the other books in the series? Do you have books planned beyond this?
Yes, I do. I plan to go through all of the science fiction tales that have ever been told about Mars and other books as well to pick out specific words that have been used to discuss the language of the fictional Martians, or the various cultures that storytellers told about living on Mars, and publish a book about that. Come up with a lexicon, a Martian lexicon. And I want to get back to space law and write a book about the legal aspects of a sustainable colony on other places in the solar system, not just Mars, but the moon, asteroids, perhaps some of the moons orbiting Jupiter, like Callisto, which is far enough outside the Jupiter's radiation belt where we probably could send an expedition there. But getting into the legal aspects of how do you own property on these planets, and what type of legal system would we have for owning real property on Mars? Would it be as it is on Earth, where you own it outright, or there are some places in the world where you actually lease the property from the crown, and it's actually the crown that holds the title.
Yeah.
So things like this need to be hashed out. Also, what are the legal aspects of modifying the environment, not just terraforming, but what do you do with the waste material that is inevitably generated by human activity, and who has the liability for that, for containing it, for storing it, for converting it, or whatever. Another legal aspect would be, well, suppose we find indigenous Martian organisms. What rights do they have? I mean, they were there first, and we're the Johnny come latelys. Do we have a duty to preserve that that indigenous Martian life? I think we have a moral duty to do that, and we also have a scientific one, because we're going to need to study that life to figure out what lessons evolution learned in surviving in such a harsh environment, and maybe we can modify Earth organisms so that they have the same characteristics, so that we can better live on Mars. Not necessarily modifying human organisms, but possibly crops. Possibly we could modify crops so that they would gradually become better accustomed to the Martian environment. For instance, getting back to the film The Martian, the potatoes were grown inside a pressurized dome, so that was essentially an Earth-like atmosphere. If you genetically modify organisms, you could, over time, lessen the Earth-like nature of that enclosed environment and make it more Mars-like. This would reduce your costs, of course, because you're spending less energy creating a specifically Earth-like environment for your crops, and letting the Martian environment do more of the work for you. And then, of course, there's the ultimate question of, is there sentient life out there? And if we meet sentient life, number one, how would we recognize that it was sentient? Number two, how legally would we confer personhood on them, and therefore specific rights? That's a very, very interesting question.
Yeah. Well, where are we able to find your book, The Martian Almanac 220 Volume 1?
Okay, right now it's on Amazon. It's available in hardcover, paperback, and Kindle. It's also going to be on Barnes and Noble and Google Books and several other online outlets.
Well, many thanks for talking to us today. It's been great to have you on the show.
Okay, well, thank you. I've enjoyed it immensely.